Hello, Billy here. Today I wanted to talk about how I use Claude Code in my daily routine. So first, a little bit about me. I am a data scientist with a PhD, and I've been doing coding for over a decade at this point, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how my workflow has changed since I started coding years ago. And generative AI has really changed how I've been doing coding, especially more recently. And even in the past 6 months, how I started using Claude Code is different from how I use it today. So I wanted to go over a little bit about how I started using Claude Code and how I'm using it right now. One of the big ways that I started using generative AI starting out was using a web browser and logging into my account, whether it be Gemini or another service, and doing interactive conversations with the tool. Then I decided that it would be really beneficial to try something like Claude Code, which would have limited access to a lot of files to help expedite some of the processes that I was doing. So previously what I was doing was I was basically prompting the generative AI with a problem, trying to implement their solution, using that solution, then encountering an error, feeding that error back into the generative AI, and rinse and repeat until the problem was solved. The issue with that is that it was very time consuming and it would require a lot of human intervention of just troubleshooting issues. Then I saw and heard about Claude Code, and that really changed things, where Claude Code essentially was still making those same mistakes, but it was making those mistakes and then fixing them automatically. So it expedited the process of troubleshooting and made the workflow a lot more seamless. So I started using Claude Code just native, out of the box, without much setup, and it was very powerful and greatly improved my productivity. One of the things that I noticed with Claude Code is that I would continually check to see what tools were available for similar projects. So one of the things that I started doing is when I set up my new machine to be a dedicated Claude Code machine, I assigned certain components, certain Markdown files to certain tasks. So there is a general Claude Markdown file that is applicable to most, if not all, of my projects, where it says these are the tools that I have, this is how you get started with them on this machine, etc. So one example is LaTeX, which is a word processing tool, where basically I told Claude in this MD file what tools are on this computer, so you don't have to check and see what is available. Another Markdown file that I provide is for iOS development. So if the project is related to developing an iOS app, it then checks another MD file, this Markdown file, and uses that information to jumpstart the iOS development. So it doesn't have to check what it needs to do every time it sets up a new iPhone app. It essentially knows, okay, I'm going to do these sorts of things to work on this kind of project. So essentially what's happening is that I now have Markdown files that tell it default workflows for certain types of tasks, whether that be a data science project, which means that we're going to do word processing in LaTeX, and we're going to try to use R when possible, and use base R whenever possible, and try not to download additional packages. And then when it comes to like very specific tasks that are not part of the regular setup, it's going to look at certain Markdown files to receive specific instructions for those kinds of projects. So in a generic example that I think might be applicable to lots of people is that maybe you have a generic Markdown file for most of your daily tasks. But then if you decide, hey, I'm not happy with my job, I want to start applying to jobs, maybe you make a Markdown job file that has information regarding yourself or your CV or references, and says, okay, these are the things that you need to know when it comes to writing my job applications and helping me output more job applications more efficiently. So that's my overall generic setup when it comes to using Claude Code, where I basically have different Markdown files for different specific tasks alongside a generic Markdown file that tells Claude Code generic information about my workflow. How do you use Claude Code, if you use it at all? I'd love to hear how you have Claude Code set up to be specialized for your workflow. Feel free to leave a comment down below.